Hey everyone, happy Monday. Alyssa Orange, Mike Irwin joining you for another week of Ask Mike, and so we will get right to it. It's going to be an exciting one. I know that you've got a lot of really good questions. There's a lot of paper here. Though you printed me off like,
It's printed
I think you thought, you think I thought I went blind
No,
or
I just
something?
made a mistake and the printing is too large.
That's okay. It's easier for me to see. All right. Our first question is from Dr. Strangepork, who wants some history from us. And he asked, what is the biggest win of every Razorback coach since Broyles? Have to put Broyles in a different category. Skip Kynes, John L., and Lunny, the three interim head coaches.
Okay, we got some graphics here because I'm going to have to, I had to do some deep thinking on this. So I'm going to read this to you while you look at the graphics. Now, Holtz, that was easy. The 78 Orange Bowl was one of the biggest wins in school history, so there's no discussion there. Hatfield, to me, it has to be the 88 game. That was the win that gave Arkansas its first perfect Southwest Conference season since '65. That's a 23-year period. So the Hogs went to the Cotton Bowl also for the first time in 13 years. So to me, that was a huge win, beating A&M in '88. Jack Crow, there weren't many big wins, but the 14-13 win over Texas and Little Rock was huge. The Hogs were a perfect 4-0 in the Southwest Conference at that point. And I think they would have won the conference, but the next week, quarterback Jason Allen tore his knee up against Baylor. Now, Arkansas didn't have a good backup quarterback, and they lost 4 of their last 5 games. Jack was obviously snake bit as a head coach. A lot of bad things happened to him. Danny Ford has to be the '95 Alabama game in Tuscaloosa. I think most people would agree with that. J.J. Metters made that sliding catch in the end zone off a pass from Barry Lunny Jr. It was 4th and goal from the Alabama 3 with 6 seconds left in the game, and it gave the Razorbacks a 20-19 win. That broke a 6-game losing streak against Alabama. Arkansas went on to make its first appearance in the SEC championship game that season. Houston Nutt. Now, some are going to say it's that 99 win over Tennessee in Fayetteville where people went crazy and duct taped the gold post to a building on Dixon Street and all that. But I still say it was the upset in 3 overtimes of LSU in 2007. Tigers, remember, were the national champions that season, and Arkansas beat them in front of their own fans, and that also turned out to be the last game that Houston had ever coached at Arkansas. Bobby Petrino, I'd have to say the Cotton Bowl win over Kansas State in 2012, and here's why. That gave Arkansas an 11-2 record, only the 3rd time in school history that an Arkansas team has won 11 games. The 64 and 77 teams were the other 2. Brett Bielema. Almost everybody's going to say that Henry Heave game against Ole Miss in 2015 because that play kept Arkansas alive, and then Brandon Allen went on to win it on a 2-point conversion that he ran in and got knocked out and all that stuff, and that was great. They won that game in overtime, but to me it was not as big as the Tennessee game a month earlier, and I think you and I were on the sidelines. We were at Neyland that day, Neyland or whatever you call it.
We were on Rocky Top.
The Hogs started the season 1-3, and they were about to be 1-4 because they were down 14-0 in the first quarter in front of 100,000 in Knoxville. And I talked to you, I remember telling you they don't have a chance in hell to win this game. And then Brandon Allen just got it together, and somehow they came back and won it 24-20. And that was significant because that totally turned the season around. The Hogs ended up 8-5, 5-3 in the SEC, and that was Brett Bielema's best team ever at Arkansas. Chad Morris, I mean, it's kind of a trick question because were there any big wins? There were only 4 of them. You know, I guess I got to go with Tulsa in 2018. That was Arkansas's first shutout in 4 years, and obviously the only one under Morris. And it was also notable because Connor Nolan went to 1-0 as a starter at Arkansas. And I don't think he ever started again, did he? Did Connor?
Sorry. There was only 4 of them. Just made me laugh. But I think you're right.
There's not much of a choice there. You just look at them, and this seemed like the best one. I mean, Connor Nolan, I think, went undefeated as a starter, and the only other quarterback that I know of at Arkansas that never lost a game as a starter was Mitch Mustang.
There you go.
So that was kind of big. And then Sam Pittman, again, I'm going to get some argument on this. Some say Ole Miss last year, but I think it was the Tennessee game. In the preseason, some were saying Arkansas wouldn't win a game against its all-SEC schedule. Well, that win made Arkansas 3-3 at the time, and as we all know, they were really 4-3 because everybody and their dog knows that the Hogs beat Auburn. So that 3-3 was important, and it's 3 more wins than they had in 2 years under Chad Morris, SEC wins. So I think that's the biggest win under Sam Pittman. So there's all that.
I like it. You know, going back to Brett Bielema, because I remember obviously both of those games, we were at both of those games, and I think you're right. I think the Ole Miss game changed the course of the SEC. It was more impactful for the SEC West than it really was for Arkansas, because at that point, Ole Miss losing that game, you are now Alabama ends up winning the West, and they went on to the SEC title game. And Ole Miss, had they won that game, they would have won the West that year.
But I really believe if they had lost that Tennessee game, that season was going down the tubes.
Yeah, it was.
And it
was
turned
rough.
out to be his best year ever. They went crazy after they won that game. They started winning.
Yeah, they did. All right. Blood Red Hog says ESPN recently ranked the top 100 football coaches of the past 50 years. Broyles was ranked 30, Darrell Royal 18, Petrino 77, Ford 39, and Holtz 19. 30 seems low to me. Where would you rank Broyles?
First of all, these things, and especially when they're done by ESPN, are ridiculous. I mean, these people have no context to what they do. I think they're just looking up records and going, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know what the process was there, but here's the thing about Coach Broyles. You've got to understand what he took over in 1958. He took over a football program that had never had any kind of sustained success. They had some good teams, 1909, 1910 and 11 under Hugo Bezdek. They had 3 or 4 good teams under Fred Thompson in the 30s, and maybe 1 or 2 other seasons as you go along, but they'd never had any sustained success. Arkansas had no facilities compared to the other Southwest Conference teams. They had the smallest stadium. It was terrible, 40,000. Now, you had Little Rock, but you don't play all your games there. They dressed in these little stupid buildings that called half houses that were horrible. Dressing room for the games was terrible. They didn't have 2 football fields to practice on. They had a field and a half. I remember what that was like even when I got here, and it was worse in the 60s. Coach Broyles came in. They didn't make a lot of money from their ticket sales. TV money wasn't big in those days. So he didn't have the budget that, say, Darrell Royal and some of those other coaches had. He had enough money to pay big money for 2 coordinators, which he did, and then he figured out a way to get other assistant coaches to come in here on low salaries. And he ran that program on a shoestring for all through the 60s. They won a national championship. They almost won 3 others. They came really close to winning 3 other games that would have, if they'd have won, they'd have won the national championship. So look at what he did in that 10-year period, and you're going to tell me he's the 30th best coach of all time? These people are meatballs. I'd rate him in the top 10. I'm not going to sit here and go 4th or 5th or 7th or whatever, but he's a top 10 all-time coach because of what he did with what he had. And that's where they go wrong. They don't have any context on these coaches. They just look at records or whatever and go, I mean, come on, you're going to, I don't know. And they got Petrino 77th. You may not like that guy, but that guy can coach, you know.
Who would you have at 1? I haven't seen this list, so I have no idea who's at 1.
I'd put Saban up there. I mean,
You'd have to.
I think he's surpassed Bear Bryant. And so he'd be right up there, and Bear would be there, and you got guys like Joe Paterno and some of those. But, and Bobby Bowden would be up there, you know, top 5 or 6. But Broyles is right in there because he did more with less than any of those other guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the Bionic Pig wants to know, now that punishment has levied at Papa Broyles' old employer, what is the possibility of him brought on as an offensive consultant under his son? His son-in-law is Ole Miss OC, and he may pull the trigger first.
I've asked around. Nobody's seen him. Nobody knows of any plan to bring him in here as an analyst or whatever. I think what brings that up is that he was here last spring, and there was all kinds of talk last spring that it might happen, but at that time he had not been cleared by the NCAA, which he has been now. I think he's going to be an assistant coach next year somewhere, and maybe even a head coach now that he's been cleared. He's just too good, and I don't think the NCAA cleared him of not breaking their rules. That doesn't mean he didn't screw up at Baylor. There were a whole bunch of people that were at fault there, and what went on there was unacceptable. It was bad, but because he's been cleared, he's probably going to get hired somewhere else, and they're going to say everybody deserves a second chance. We're going to put him on a tight leash. Let's don't have any more of these incidents with co-eds on campus. If you do, you're fired. So I think he's going to end up a head coach somewhere. Now, would he then be an analyst this year while he's waiting for that to happen? I don't know. The word was that when he was here last spring, what little he did, somehow the offense looked really good. I guess some of the players really liked what he was doing. So that might make you think, well, okay, if that's the case, let's bring him in. And they might. I don't know. I just think he's not going to be a consultant or an analyst very long. I think he will end up as a head coach. And hopefully, because as talented as he is and as good as he is at running that offense that he does, I hope he doesn't run into those other problems. I hope he pays more attention to how his athletes are behaving when he gets his next job.
Yeah. All right, Superhog 1959 says, what stuck out to me with Morris was the lack of team organization and players that seemed not to know where to go or what to do. How does that, and I'm assuming he's talking about on the field. Right. How does that compare with what you see now under Pittman? What have you seen in practices that would make me think we would win 7 games this year and go to a bowl?
Oh, man. Those two guys, Pittman and Chad Morris, are like 180. Morris's problem, and I'm not saying this, the players said it. And not all of them, but some of those team leaders said after he was gone, what the problem was, they said they never bought into anything he said. They didn't believe him. They just felt like he was a guy up there talking to him, yak, 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 and it goes in one ear and out the other. And as we know, I mean, we're hearing this every time we turn around over there when we talk to those athletes and in recruiting. Sam Pittman is a guy that when he talks to you, you sort of believe he's real, that what he's saying to you is not a line. Yeah. So he's the opposite of Morris in that respect. Now, his staff, I mean, there's no comparison. Chad Morris had a terrible staff, especially his coordinators were just bad. And I think everybody would agree that, you know, Sam Pittman, considering he was a first-year coach, did a good job of hiring coordinators. And then look what he did with his staff. About half of it is now gone in the second year and replaced. One of those guys left on his own, but the 3 others were replaced because they wanted better recruiters. So, and we're seeing the results of that. I mean, they bring in Dow Loggins out of the NFL, and everybody's going, well, he's never recruited a report. Well, Sam must have known what he was doing because he's already landed 3 top recruits in a very short period of time. So there's just no way to compare all those two. It's just like night and day, 180. You're just on the opposite side of the spectrum. Now, why would that? What can I tell you to make you think they're going to win 7 games? You picked that number. I didn't. Right now, talk is always, to me, cheap. And the hardest thing to cover in August camp is you don't see very much, like we didn't see the scrimmage at all, and you're just going on talk. I think this is genuine with these guys. I don't think it's blowing smoke at us, and I don't think Pittman does that. So I think they're going to be better, but I probably wouldn't go with 7 games. I'd probably go with 6. Okay. And then you get to a bowl game if you win 6. Pretty much. So I think, you know, it's not like last week when the guy thought they would win 11 games and then he emailed me back, said he was just kind of kidding around. He really think they would win 11. But 6, I think, is realistic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Muskogee Hog fan says, I read that Trey Williams had a big and productive first scrimmage on Saturday. I've also read that the linebackers have been impressed with the quickness of John Ridgway, a defensive tackle, in terms of his initial quick first step off the ball. Can you speak to that and also the quickness and productivity of Trey Williams at defensive end?
Yeah, apparently he had a really good scrimmage, was very disruptive. I think he had a couple of sacks. Pittman said he had at least 2 and maybe 3. He was going to have to go back and look at the film, and nobody's talked to Pittman since then, so I don't know if it was 2 or 3. He also had a bunch of quarterback hurries. He's very quick. He's that pass rush guy they want, that every down he's coming after you, he's quick. They've been looking for somebody like that and it goes past Pittman, back 2 or 3 staffs they've needed people like that. And so that's a good sign. I've said before, I think I told you yesterday maybe, that K.J. Jefferson and that offensive line, they both needed to be pressed. They needed to put pressure on them, and he did that. And then Ridgeway did the same thing. Now, comparing those two guys, Pittman said that Trey Williams, he tried to recruit him out of high school when he was at Georgia, when Pittman was at Georgia, and he said obviously went to Missouri. He said when he got to Missouri, he said, I'm not trying to brag, but I had one of the best offensive lines in the country at Georgia. And we couldn't ever deal with this guy. He just was a thorn in our side every time we played him. And he said, now he's here and he's doing the same thing to our offensive linemen, which is kind of a good thing that you've got somebody like that. He's very quick. He's just got a high motor, all this stuff. He said 10 things about him, that are positive.
You got to love that.
And then Ridgeway he's bigger. He's like 6'6", 320. So he doesn't have the quickness that Williams has, but he's quick to be that big and very physical. He's a guy that played at Illinois State, and if you'll remember that conference, they played their football last spring, and they only played 8 games. But in 4 of those games, he was like amazing. In a 4-game stretch, he had something like 4 quarterback sacks, 2 interceptions, 3 more tackles behind the line of scrimmage. He tied for the team lead in tackles. He did all that stuff in an 8-game schedule. So he came in here off of a pretty good year, and I think they're very hopeful. That is the best improved position, and we've seen some improvement. We went over that yesterday on our Pig Trail show. Most of those positions are improved this year. That may be the most improved because they brought in, I think, 4 guys that can all help, and they already had some pretty good people there. So I give Sam Pittman a lot of credit. When the season was over, he looked and said, whoa, that's where we have the problem. We have to have a better pass rush than what we had last year, and we can't wear down like we did last year. We need help. We need depth. We need to be able to rotate guys in and out. And so far, it looks like that's the case. And when I said yesterday that it's a good thing when a defense dominates a scrimmage in August camp, that's what I meant. Because it's good for 2 reasons. It shows your defense is now developing a pass rush, but it also means that defense is putting pressure on the offensive line and the quarterback, and you can't have KJ Jefferson and those linemen go into the season opener, play their first 2 games, and they haven't been tested in August. So
exactly.
it looks good.
Yeah. All right, Twinkie. Twinkie.
Yeah, it's Twinkie.
Twinkie. Okay. I don't know why for some reason. Okay, Twinkie 27-5 says, with the success that Hunter Yurachek is having as AD, do you foresee him being lifted to the status like that of Frank Broyles?
There's only one Frank Broyles, and he won't be at that level because Broyles also had going for the fact that he'd been a great coach here first. I mean, he won a national championship. He'd won all those games, especially in the 60s. He'd done all this stuff. So he goes into being AD with that already on his resume, and then he's one of the few coaches, ex-coaches, that turned out to be a really outstanding AD. But you don't see that anymore. Athletic directors these days are all classically trained.
Business.
They know all about business, and they know how to organize the staff, and they have to do all these things. The thing, though, that gets left by the wayside with these guys sometimes is they don't, as we saw with Jeff Long, they don't necessarily have good relationships with the boosters and then the average fan, and they don't necessarily come across very well with the media, and both of those things are important, and that's one of the big problems Jeff Long had. Hunter Yurachek doesn't have those problems. We've seen already. They've got a much better relationship with the media, much better relationship with the boosters and the fans, and he's just a guy right now that I think people like. But the main thing is this. You can always tell when somebody's got one of these corporate ADs that can't do the total job because they always do search firms when they're looking for a coach. What a stupid idea. If you're an AD and you don't know how to go out and find coaches and hire them, you don't need to be the AD. And Hunter Yurachek, as we've seen, that's when he went out and got Eric Musselman, when he went out and got Sam Pittman, he's looking for somebody that comes in here and fits. And I don't know how he knew that because he wasn't around here. He must have heard somebody talk about it and decided it was important. But you almost have to understand the culture of Razorback athletics to understand you can't bring coaches in here who go, I don't care about what the culture is here. This is what I'm going to do. Yes, if you win, it doesn't matter, but
you still have to be relatable.
you do. You have to. And
Chad Morris was not.
Yes, and the fans have to believe that you understand what's important to them. And you just look at what's going on now. We talked about Dow Loggins. Loggins was asked the other day, you know, I think the media's attitude is, man, you were in the NFL all those years. You were an offensive coordinator at the pro level. Why would you want to come back to this job and be a tight ends coach? He said, this is the job I've always wanted. I've always wanted to work for Arkansas. So when you can tap into that, and you can't have every guy on your staff like that, but when you can do that, you know what it leads to? It leads to what we see right now. What's going on? Musselman is around all the other sports. Pittman, you see him showing up at the other sports. Dave Van Horn, they're all kind of rooting for each other. And
Neighbors,
it becomes a big, giant family, and that's because they're all buying into this whole Razorback thing.
Yeah, the one Razorback thing, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, and speaking of Hunter Yurachek, I'm glad you got a question about this because it blew up on social media. Whippersnapper wants to know your thoughts on Hunter Yurachek taking the cleat to the face during a scrimmage. You know, Mike, I quote tweeted the picture we're about to see with Hunter, and I said, man, that looks bad. Hope the cleat was okay.
Yeah. First of all, I've seen a lot of these sideline collisions. We all have.
Yeah.
And what usually happens? Somebody just gets run over.
Yeah.
You know, there's somebody.
This was wild.
But
Look.
this is not getting run over. This is the cleat going in the air. Well,
Jeff, that's Josh Ogilvie. We're going to watch it one more time.
Watch his shoe go up and whack right across the face.
And now look,
that is the most unusual sideline collision that I've ever seen. And this is what he ended up looking like. But the main thing is he had fun with it.
Yeah.
He started talking about how he took one for the team and you got to be tough. And then I think Catalan got involved. He was afraid. He tweeted something about,
hey, Coach,
am I going to be off scholarship
sorry,
now?
I pushed Josh Ogilvie out of bounds.
And then even Musselman got involved and started making fun of John Fagg, who's the #1 aide to Yurachek, and I guess he was standing right there, and he started making fun of how he just took off and abandoned Yurachek to get cleated. So the whole thing just...
I mean, Yurachek even made a Bobby Petrino motorcycle reference, so it was great.
I wasn't off on a motorcycle somewhere.
Here's
I can prove I was at the scrimmage. So what I would say about this is another thing about your AD is he knows how to have fun on social media, and these days that's important.
Yeah. All right. Swine American asks, with OU and Texas joining the SEC with football, will football officials become full-time employees instead of guys who sell insurance during the week? In the offseason, they could conduct clinics on campuses teaching coaches and players more about the rules and how they are called in a game.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've brought this up before. I do believe that you need full-time officials in football. There's enough money in the sport, I think you could afford it. But what people always say to me when I talk about this, they go, well, what would they do in the off-season? You know, like they would just stand around and do nothing. One of the things that officials could do if they're full-time in the off-season is you go and you put together a collection of controversial calls during the year from all the games they did and all the SEC games. And you sit there and you study them. And then you've got your peers all in there with you and you go, well, I called this because this is what I thought I saw. Well, and then somebody else goes, yeah, but what about this? And they sit in there in a room and maybe spend one whole day discussing one call, like that ridiculous call in the Auburn game. And then in the end, you come to some sort of consensus so you know that
so they have a continued education.
Yes. So the next time that incident comes up, that situation, they know what to do. And then his suggestion is outstanding of going on campus with clinics. You wouldn't send every official, but you might send 2 or even 1, and they all go around to various SEC schools, and they meet with the coaches and the players and sit and discuss things like targeting. They can explain the targeting rule. Then what happens is, if you've got a free and open discussion, a guy like Catalan is going to say, okay, let me ask you this. I've got my head up, but I'm about to tackle a guy that lowers his head, and so I've got to go lower. But what if
so if you're using the Catalan, he turned his body and hit him with his shoulder.
That was a terrible call.
Gosh.
But there are incidents where you, as a tackler, you don't always control where that ball carrier's helmet goes. So you may be in a good position to do it, and then he comes up and all of a sudden, whack, you have helmet-to-helmet contact, but it's really because more of him than you. So they could get into various discussions about that, how you alter that. I've always thought there's a problem when you're trying to tackle a guy and he leaves his feet. Now he's going down lower. Well, what are you going to do? Just stick your chest out and let him go into your chest with his helmet? There's a natural instinct to go down with him, and now you've got two helmets kind of going down. So what do you do in situations like that?
Could you ever, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but this is something they could talk about. Could you ever get involved with offensive targeting? Like why does it always have to be the defensive player's fault if there is clear evidence that the offensive player put his body in a position to be tackled, head-to-head contact or something like that? Like, because a lot of these targeting things you see, now there are some blatant ones, they're bad. But there are some ones, just like we saw with Catalan and we've seen in Arkansas games and across college football, that there's nothing this defender can do because that offensive player has changed the trajectory of his body.
Of their body. And so these are the kind of things that could be discussed in a clinic with the coaches there and the players there, and you get one-on-one discussions going with these officials, and maybe they come back from a clinic and talk to their colleagues and go, hey, they brought up an interesting point when we were at Arkansas and blah, blah, blah. And I just think there's so many things that these officials could do if they were full-time. Now, can the league afford it? I don't know. The way they keep adding teams and getting more and more big games and getting bigger TV packages and drawing more fans, you'd think they could. But all of this, I think this is an excellent idea. I'm kind of skeptical about whether it'll happen or not.
Yeah. All right, I kind of cheated and read the next question, and it made my eyes roll. So, Blood Red Hog wants to know, not the question, just the context of the question. What is your opinion of the article by Dave Hooker in Saturday Down South, which said Vandy and Arkansas should be worried about being ousted from the SEC if Notre Dame and Clemson were to join?
Well, my reaction, and you can give us your reaction here. My reaction is that's clickbait.
Yeah.
You write a story that's just controversial. You don't really believe it.
Yeah.
There's zero evidence that the SEC is in any kind of mode where it's going to get rid of teams. They're adding teams. They've never gotten rid of teams when they added teams. The whole point is to expand. Well, they're at 16 when these two new teams come in. Okay, so let's say they decide to add, and I don't think it would be Notre Dame, but let's say it was Notre Dame and Clemson. Okay, why would you add two more and then take two away and stay where you are? You would just go to 18, and then you might go to 20. There's no history of the SEC kicking teams out. I'm not even sure it's legal. I'm sure there's some kind of contract there that they can't just go, well, we've decided you're not cool, go away. It's a bad look. And then the other thing that bothers me about this is this guy clearly is just looking at what Arkansas has done in football for the last 3 or 4 years.
I think that you're about to hit the nail on the head because this is how I feel.
Yeah, and so you're not looking at the overall athlete. You're not looking at crowd support, fan base, the TV revenue. The state of Arkansas may be a small TV market, but when the game is on, everybody's watching it. They've got a high saturation. So it's exactly the kind of team you want in your league if you're the SEC. That's why Roy Kramer wanted Arkansas, because they had a passionate fan base. Arkansas has always done well on TV and ratings. No, they're not going to have higher numbers than Alabama, but
comparative, percentage-wise, it's a high percentage of people who watch.
If they did something like this, said we're going to kick two teams out, which I will say they're not going to do ever, but if they were to do that, Arkansas wouldn't be where they start. There's other teams there that don't. They certainly don't have the overall athletic program, and that's the other thing he's not taking into consideration.
That's what pisses me off, I think, as you say I get to kind of voice my opinion, is I am so tired of people talking about this addition of Texas and OU or the SEC wanting to kick out Arkansas with their football blinders on, because it makes me angry. I am sorry, but a program like Arkansas that had 10 SEC regular season titles a year ago, and I think the next school had like 3 or 2 overall in your athletic department, you're not kicking that school out. No. The SEC, I get that football makes a lot of money, but baseball, basketball, women's basketball, soccer, track, like, they would be stupid
Well,
And so take off your football blinders. I get so annoyed.
then Saturday down south is that Clay Travis thing, and I think it's based somewhere out of the eastern part of the SEC. I'm not sure where they
Yeah,
are.
I think he's in Tennessee somewhere.
Somewhere up there,
I believe.
And he's periodically taken shots at Arkansas. Clay Travis himself. He didn't write this, but he's pretty much acted like over the years Arkansas's got dopey fans and it doesn't belong in the league and all that. That's just stuff they do to make people mad.
We get told, where we work, obviously, websites make money. So they want clicks. They want people to watch their videos. They get paid by advertisers for how many people click on your web articles. So if you're Clay Travis, you want people to click on these so you can make some money, but you're appealing to, he knows if he wants to get a reaction out of any fan base at all,
Push a button.
Push the Arkansas button, because the whole state's going to come after you. It's not like Mississippi where people are separated, or Alabama where people are separated with their allegiance. The whole state will come after you if you come after Arkansas.
I think he's gone to a pay system, because I used to get that on Twitter and I just read whatever they had, because I read all this SEC stuff. And lately when I've clicked on there, you get about 2 sentences in and it says you got to pay.
Yeah.
So don't pay.
Don't pay.
Maybe he'll go back to being a free service and understand that,
Yeah.
he's a little bit over the top. That article in particular had so many holes in it, it's not even funny.
Yeah. Well,
It's not as bad.
Say?
It's worse than the thing where they ranked Coach Broyles 30th best coach of all time.
Yeah. It's talking season, Mike. People have real something to talk about here in a couple of weeks. All right. That's this week's Ask Mike. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.